My name is Jacob Meders, Mechoopda, Maidu. I live here in Phoenix. I've been here, probably like 15 years, maybe. I'm not sure. It's been a while, maybe longer. I teach at ASU's West Campus. I'm a master printmaker. My print studio is WarBird Press. And yeah, so what I want to do is share some of the work that I've done over the years. Some of this is print process, print knowledge, and then I'll also do a little demo since we already have everything out here in the studio from the class that we've been teaching. And yeah, so I think I have a PowerPoint, and Allison will probably cue that up here in a second. And I'll just kind of move through that and talk a little bit about my history and work. So the title of this talk is Too Many Capitalists, Not Enough Indians. It's a little play on humor and the idea of too many Indians, not enough chiefs. And an indigenous adjustment to the Western narrative is basically because of this, a lot of this is printmaking or the idea of documentation of indigenous people through a colonial lens. And it's my critique of that as an artist. Next slide, please. There you go. So this is a series I did of colotypes. Colotypes is a 19th century photo process. I'll talk a little bit more about the process. This is just the case. I hand bound this case, and the title of this is Expanding on Europe. So Expanding on Europe is basically a call to the idea that American history starts with colonialism and people from Europe coming here. It tends to only be spoken about in that terms as far as the United States. So I like to talk about indigenous people traveling to Europe in this series. Next. So what I did is I looked at a lot of print archives. So I'm looking at and thinking about documentation and how things are documented, but I'm looking at European documentation of European history, myth, religion, and I'm looking at their prints as this reference. So here you see a Charles Le Brun, and the title is called Hercules Slaying the Centaurs. And so I'm looking at that. This is actually from the Getty collection. And I'm taking actual digital photos of this. I'm using a digital camera, taking a digital photo, and I'm taking my own documentation of a current technology. Next. And then what I do is I put it in Photoshop. I mess with the contrast and also mess with the scale, and I crop the composition a bit. Next. And then once I do that, I'll put the little plastic Indian in the foreground and use the digital printout as a backdrop. And then the next step is to shoot that with a film camera. I have like a Canon AE1 that's a film camera, 35mm, and I'll shoot that with the print as a backdrop that's inkjet shot, and then the plastic Indian in the front. And then I go into the studio and I make a colotype out of that. And the colotype is a 19th century photo process. So I'm digressing in process as I'm moving forward with the print. And then as you see at the bottom of this print is a title. Instead of Hercules slaying Centaur, it says Rains in Face slaying Custard, because it was said that Rains in Face slayed Custard. By his own account, he said he wasn't really sure if he did, because in the heat of the battle, you're not really paying attention directly to the person you're killing. You're just trying to like keep from being killed. And so yeah, so this process, what I'm doing is I'm digressing in history in the process of making it. And I'm talking about history and I'm documenting a little bit different, and the narrative is changing. The narrative is changing to an indigenous person in history, and every Native person I've used in this whole series, they at some point in their life traveled to Europe. So thus expanding on Europe. Another key element in my work is to think about using colonial imagery as well as indigenous imagery, because quite often people who look at my work are not indigenous. So if I'm only using indigenous imagery, some of these people are not seeing the whole story, and I'm not able to translate everything for them from an indigenous perspective. But if I use a little bit of a European history, I'm taking something that's familiar with their visual history. So something that they become familiar with. And I'm using that familiarity to then have another dialogue with them. I'm actually changing their perspective a bit. Checks, next. checks. So here's a few more. So there's a Goya to the right. Instead of what more can we do, it's what more can Squanto do. Another one on the left, I believe, is a Durr print. And then the portrayal of Christ becomes the portrayal of Donna Kana. Next. And then what I did is I did an exhibition where I wanted to appropriate my own imagery. So kind of beating the punch to the capitalism. So quite often native imagery is then capitalized and it's commodified. And so what I did is I took these prints, these high art prints, and what I've done is now make puzzles out of them. And I've created this alternative gift shop. So alternative or alternative, you could read it either way. And the idea of alternative as the other, but also alter the native, changing the native through colonial lens. Next. And here are some of the pieces that I had in the gift shop. A plastic Indian that I casted in metal. And these were called, You Cannot Blame the Youth. Next. And then I did these handmade slip cast porcelain bobbleheads. So urbanized the Indian and put him on a bicycle instead of a horse. Next. Basically a cigar Indian, but in a suit. Next. And then a buffalo, of course. Next. So here's a shot of one of the times I've installed the gift shop. As you can see, there's a register and there's all these items. Now these items aren't for sale, they're to installation, but quite often people, when they engage this part of an installation, they actually try to buy these things that I'm critiquing, which then when the museum tells them they're not for sale, as installations start to realize that they're kind of buying into the commodification of the work. Next. Now here's a detail, mugs, keychains, all the kind of stuff you'll get at a gift shop, stickers. Next. This piece right here is part of an installation that I've done a few times, and it's talking about sustainability in one aspect, but it's also talking about communication in the land. So as weavers, the weavers have a extremely deep knowledge of the land and the plant life. Quite often weavers tend to be healers because they have such a deep knowledge of plant life. And so I'm looking at that, but I'm looking at these baskets that I'm weaving as baskets that would be used for catching fish or birds. And then I do them at a very large scale. And the scale is at least 6 feet wide in the opening of the basket. And the idea is to talk about sustainability in a way of more people encroaching on the land and having to build bigger and bigger baskets to catch more and more animals, fish or birds, right? Because there's not enough for everybody. You have to start catching more and more. So you start to take more from the land than you need. And with that, I use a Cat5 ether cable, which is an internet cable, talking about current technology. So this is not something new. Us as an indigenous people have been talking about since colonization has started back in the 1400s. But it's something that's been talked about over and over and over, and how we communicate this idea changes, and how we use that. And so now I'm just trying to use this concept of using current technology. At what level do we have to speak about this, and for how long until things change? Next. And that's a detail of the Cat5 ether cable woven into the basket. Next. Here's a buffalo. So this specific exhibition was at the ASU Anthropology Museum. It's called the museum is called Human Evolution, Social Change. And so in a lot of ways, I'm critiquing the authority of the museum and the institution. For so long, we've had issues with anthropologies and how they've studied Native people, treating them as specimens. And so I critique this in a way as I poke a little bit of fun about history and how history is documented by the other. And so I built this buffalo out of salvaged material in the city. So I dumpster dove for about 3 months and found all this material. And then I created this buffalo out of the found material that was waste, basically, right? All this was waste. And then I brought it into the museum, and I had a panel that said that urban Indians built these buffaloes to practice hunting buffaloes, waiting for the return of the buffalo. So in a way, talking about just different ways that Native culture is kind of misunderstood by the outside, but at the same time, talking about the history of the buffalo being wiped out. So it's a little bit of play of both. Next. I did a series of photogravures, which is a etching. of copper plates, and it's a reference to Edward Curtis. He was a studio photographer in the Seattle area, and so he was really into making these very beautiful portraits of indigenous people, but quite often he had his own stash of what he would call costumes. So often he would dress Native people in regalia or clothing that he thought was more beautiful than what they were wearing, so it would not be accurate. But these started becoming documentations of indigenous people that were used by historians. So they also would reference certain photos that Edward Curtis would have and say, well, this is what your people wore at that time, even though it might be a basket that they're holding and they didn't weave that basket. They came from a different village or a different tribe or a different part of the Turtle Island, or also what they're wearing. Next. So I started taking just very candid photos of some of my family members and people in my tribe or tribes near us, and just kind of taking these shots as a true documentation of who we are now in current time, without dressing this up and making it something any more or any less than it actually is. And using the same exact 19th century photo process of etching copper plates and printing them. So yeah, so this is just some photos that I would like to share with you. Next. 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 So some of the dancers you see are grindstone dancers. They're not actually Mechoopda, but we had a gathering where the grindstone came and danced. Next. So I also started another series at some point, which was called Divided Lines. And I looked at the woodcuts and the woodcut reliefs that were depicting indigenous people during first contact. And so I wanted to critique that as well. Next. And so what I did is do my own woodcuts, and I did homogenized bodies. So bodies that are split torsos. So dealing with the idea of how we identify ourselves and changing that. And next. And you can see that this print, these prints were very long. So this is my old studio from way back when. And I actually had to send it through the rafters to finish the print. But they were 15 feet long. So there were 3 by 2 feet wood blocks, and there was 5 of them. Next. And I had to put them outside to let them dry, because I had nowhere to really let them dry in my studio or in my home. Next. And here's one of them you can see on the wall. And basically the horizon line matches up on all these blocks. And it's kind of like a storyline, but the idea is that the storyline is consistently inconsistent. So the next installation, next, is how it's meant to be seen, which is 4 of these 15-foot long prints, all in different orders. So you're questioning the story that you're being told because it's consistently inconsistent. So talking about the print as a form of documentation, and also talking about a story that's documented, that's always changing, evolving, because there's always things left out or people are moving things around. And it's a very colonial way of kind of trying to make the story fit an ideal perspective, or just sharing a little bit of the bad stuff, not all the bad stuff, or just the good stuff and not any of the bad stuff. So it's kind of questioning. It's more leaving a question for the viewer with these prints than actually giving you an answer. Next. And these are just details of each block. Next. 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 And next. This is the installation. So what you see in the middle here is a newspaper vending machine. So I have about 6 of these. And this is kind of part of my social engagement practice, where I like to put these in public places, use current social media to let people know where they're at. And then they can find a print that's a handmade letterpress print that they could take home for their own collection. What you see here is an installation of that vending machine. I've hooked it up with contact mics and subwoofers. And so on the left is a surveillance camera monitor. So there's a camera actually inside the machine documenting the hands going in and out of the machine, grabbing prints. And on the right is just a video that shows the process of letterpress making. So, but when people open up when they have to open up the machine, they have to put $3 in quarters in it. So as the quarters go in the machine, it's disrupting the environment. So the exchange of currency becomes this sound disruption. And then so they have to commit to putting, $3 in quarters, which is 12 quarters in there. So every time they put a quarter in there, it's just this complete racket that happens into this gallery space, and it's disruptive. But the idea is that the exchange of currency becomes this disruptive thing. And if they're committed to keep disrupting the place, to continue to put coins in it to pull out the print, is the idea. Next. And these are just some prints that I did in Santa Fe during the residency with IAIA and the Museum of Contemporary Native Art. And so I interviewed different people in Santa Fe or Opewenge and talked to them. And then after I finished talking to them, I would go back and say, I have this quote from our talk, do you mind if I use it? And they have to approve that. And then once they approve, what I would like to use as a quote, I set it in type, so hand set type. And then I run it on my letterpress machine, which is a vintage newspaper machine for proofing. And then I do an edition of that. And then once I do that, I put it in the vending machine, and then I put it there in public in Santa Fe. So my exchange was sitting for a couple hours talking to each person, then gets shared with the public in some form or manner. So it becomes kind of like this way of re-engaging with society. So people who come in who are visitors or people who live there now can have a part of that discussion and a key moment that might have been said during that conversation. Next. 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 All right, next. So there's a vending machine and just another public place. So quite often I can put multiple vending machines out at once or one in one spot. And if you follow WarBird Press on Instagram or Facebook, that's where I usually release the information where you can find the print. Next. Something else that was in the vending machine. This was at Santa Fe Indian Market 2015. That every time I went to Santa Fe Indian Market, I would see so many people. It seemed like they were there just to see the Indians. And so I kind of wanted to comment on that, have a little commentary. Next. This is a comment on Richard Pratt. Major Richard Pratt helped create the boarding school. And one of his comments that he said to Congress and convincing them to create boarding schools was, kill the Indian, save the man. And so I changed that to kill the capitalist, save the Indian. Next. This is an installation with the vending machine. So this was actually during the election where Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were running against each other. And I put this in a shipping container on Roosevelt in downtown Phoenix. And so there's the Democrat, Republicans, and so there's this kind of blue versus red, blue states, red states. And so these prints were just, the whole interior of this wall to wall was blue and red, because people were thinking it was this kind of political thing towards the election. But the thing I was most upset about was that there's things going on in Standing Rock, there's Indian issues, but neither candidate were talking about any issues within Indian country. And so I felt like we were kind of left out of the conversation. Next. Detail, next. And so here's the print that was actually, so you went in and actually looked on the walls and saw the print. You see too many capitalists, not enough Indians. Next. This is a print that I did for an installation called Window Dressings, Indians Behind Glass. And this is a screen print. And this is basically to talk about appropriation, commodification of Native imagery. Next. And so the whole installation was about appropriation. So I basically appropriated all the imagery. None of this that you see in the window dressing here from outside was something that was my own work. It's just something that I found where other people are appropriating Native imagery, and then I cut them out of foam core And this part you could only see from outside the building. So I use this window as an actual window dressing, like a department store window, or even museums have these dioramas. So it's kind of playing with that kind of narrative. Next. Next. When you go into the gallery, then you start seeing these items, and all these items are things that I've found in junk shops, Goodwills, and thrift stores, that and so forth, and also like this cigar Indian. Next. And there was just documentation of all this history of appropriating and commodifying the native person. Next. 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 And next. So now we're moving into a more current body work called And It's Built on the Sacred. This is a screen print, I believe, of that. I can't tell by the screen, or it might be the actual, I think it's a screen print of it. But this is objects that I've also now found in thrift shop, junk shops that are dealing with the items that represent Christianity and the idea of these things, this religion being holy. But these obviously these objects are mass produced, they're commodified, commercialized, and then at the point that I have received them, they're discarded and no longer wanted. And so I indigenize them and I bring them back in the conversation. You know, what is sacred, and how do we look and treat things that are sacred or holy, right? If you're colonial, and these items, if we think about what's holy or what's sacred, are they not the same? And how do we treat them? And how do we have these conversations of sacred places for indigenous people still being destroyed? Next. And these are just porcelain little pieces that I found. Next. Next. And next. And here's the installation of those pieces. Currently, right now, if you go to Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art here in Phoenix, you can actually see a fuller representation of this installation. The photo here is a sample, just kind of working out the bugs at ASU's West Campus Gallery. So it's kind of like my kind of a proof concept installation. So as I was working through this process and what it might look like at a bigger scale, I was very limited with space and material at this time, but this was kind of just my starting off with the concept. At Scottsdale, it's a bit more grand, but you see the circular dirt dealing with a place of ceremony and healing, and the viewer having to step inside this dirt floor to actually view the exhibition. And so, yeah, next. This is also a piece that's part of that series called Manifest Destiny Has Left Your Plate Empty. And next. Here is an installation at Chico State. And Chico State and the town of Chico was built on our village, our Mechoopda village. So you'll see me calling back to the dirt floor. The blanket painting is above there. And then you'll see again, there's a bird catching, fish catching basket in the far end. So it's a reinstallation of that. And then there's a big, large screen print on the right of salmon and the idea of water and the flow of the river. But on the backside is the iridescent gold. And that's a reference towards the gold rush and how the land was being destroyed through that gold rush. Next. Just another detailed image of the installation. Next. There's a detail of the print and the salmon. Next. A view from the other side. So all three of these main objects, the basket, the blanket, and the print, are suspended because this is on our land, which means this is where my ancestors are and are buried. And so I didn't want to ground these to the ground. I wanted to make sure that they were, that the air went around all aspects of them, so they were suspended. Next. And this is the last print. This is a print that I put in the vending machine that became quite popular. Yeah, so this resist, protect, love, repeat. There you go. And so I think what we'll do now is I'll do a demo of relief printmaking. This is something that the class was working on here at the Herd this past month. Is there any Q&As I should handle right now, Marcus?
There was just one question about taking off your mask, but I was trying to answer him and let him know that we're in the room. He's next to some other people, so he's just trying to be cautious. I'm sitting away from him. But as we mentioned, we've been doing a printmaking workshop through the month, and today was today was the last day. We were printing all the carvings, linoleum carvings, linoleum cuts. And so Jake's going to take us through that process now.
So basically, I just wanted to let you guys see what we kind of worked on and how we did this. So normally what we do is I have my students start off with a drawing, and I'm just going to sketch something up real quick. Just kind of an idea of just some form, okay? And just very abstract form. And basically, once they had sketched something out, like say like that, I had them go back and fill in these lines with a really dark pencil, like this is an 8B or a 6B would work, which means the graphite is super, super soft, which means it's going to put a lot of graphite down very heavy, okay? And once they had the image that they liked, I had them do this, okay? And we talked about composition and line and form and line weight and repetition with variation. So we kind of went through a whole 2D process of building compositions. We don't have a lot of time to do that today with you guys, but once we had something down on paper with an 8B or a 6B, this graphite is like really supple. So if I put my hand on there, I can get a mark on my finger. And what I could do now is take this, put it on a piece of linoleum. We had linoleum blocks for this class, but this is still a piece of linoleum. I could take it, I could transfer it over. I had them tape it down just for the sake of the demo. We're not going to tape it down. But then I had them take something like a wooden spoon with a flat back, or this is a folding bone. I think I even used the back of a knife I had, and I could just rub the back of this. When I rub really hard, what's on the paper should, like kind of like a carbon copy, should transfer over to the block. And so there you see it's on the block, okay? And then once we did that, I had them use a water-resistant marker. These are my favorite, these little Faber-Castell ones, and they're permanent. They're also archival, funny enough, so you can use them for other things. But then I see this image. I don't know if you can see it there, like that. See that? That's the transfer. And so what I could do is I can take it and I can now mark it with the marker and fill it in. And this is only important because the way you design it, you want it to print the way you design, and it's a reverse. So if you see here, this is a reverse of that, okay? And you want to make sure that you're getting what you want the way you see it, because sometimes if it's backwards, it doesn't look quite right. Or sometimes if it's backwards, it's a letter or a number and it's not right reading. So this is why you don't make that kind of mistake. Now, once you have that, now you can carve this out. And so what I did is I made some blocks that were, we call these little jig carving jigs. And we took some tools. And these are like, this is like a little kit you can get from Lee Valley. You can also get kits from any art supply store for carving linoleum. They could be expensive or cheap. I usually have a little bit of a leather honing pad where I put a compound on it to keep them sharp all the time. And I like to use a U-gouge, which is just a U shape. Other people, a lot of times they use a V-gouge, which is a V. And basically, this block will help keep your linoleum from sliding around on a table. And so then you can take this and you can just start carving it out. You dip it in, and then you can kind of just run along that line. I like to stay away from the line and then work my way towards it a little bit as I get closer to detail. I also like to carve out a lot of this area first and then get to the detail later. So I try not to, this is getting a little smudgy just because I haven't given it time to dry for the sake of the demo, but usually this dries and it's permanent and it doesn't get smudgy. But then I just kind of work my way to the line and get the details out. If there's little corners, little edges, that's when I might take a V-gouge, stick it in the corner, and then I can work my way out of it and not cut into the area I need. Also, the deeper you go, the more you take out. And so you want to think about your angle. You don't want to go too deep and go to the back of your block or your linoleum. So how deep you go or how shallow you go, all that's important in this block. But a lot of this is learn as you go, and how skilled you are at carving and using this just depends on your results. And so once we've kind of carved out our block and we have it finalized, we go back and we have something like this. And what I like to have these areas nice and clean and flattened down. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a U-gouge. It's either really shallow, almost flat, or I take a flat carving tool and I just make sure I just trim off any little mountains in here and make sure I don't have any kind of extra little areas that might catch ink. Now, some people like that extra texture and they leave those little ridges in there, and that catches the roller when you're inking, catches it, and it's just more motion. And with that, as you see, all these carving marks are kind of moving systematically. That way, if I do catch ink in these valleys, they all have purpose and movement to them. They're not just kind of crazy and weird. And then, and this is ready to go. We can actually print this.
So Jake is moving out to the print making machine outside, the press. We have to have it in the hallway.
And this is a lot of pressure. We already set the pressure on this, and we won't go over pressure setting. But you always want to set your pressure before you ink up your block, just to make sure it's good. And that's basically adjusting this down and with paper in it and seeing how it's working out. And I've already set up a little bit of a marker for myself earlier, so I'll know where my block is going to go. I'll know where my paper is going to go. And my paper is marked top for a T right here and a bar for the bottom. So I know exactly where I'm going to set this, okay? So let's just go ink this up real quick. This is where my students were working. It looks like they cleaned up a little bit, which is nice. And the dogs ink a lot, which is not so nice. So usually when you're scraping ink out of this, you want to keep this whole area flat. So you kind of want to keep this scraped like that. You don't want to dig and get in there, because if this ink starts to dry, you want just a little skin along the surface of dry ink, not all these ridges of dry ink, because then you waste more ink. So now I'm going to do is put a little bit of ink down. I usually take a little bit and run it across like that. And then I get it on the brayer. So always leave your brayer down like that when you're not using it, so you don't create a flat spot. And there's nice little sounds. And there's a nice little velvet texture to this. And that's when you know you're right. And then I'm charging the ink, pulling back. When I'm putting down the ink, I'm going forward. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on this. I'm letting the roller do the work.
What material are you using under the ink where you're going to pick it up with the brayer?
This right here. This is this Centra board. A lot of times in the studio, I use plastic, like plexi. But this is like a Centra. It's like a hard, like kind of PVC plastic. It's kind of whatever's. It's just what we had laying around here at the herd that works. As long as it's a nice, flat, smooth surface, it should be good. Set that down. Now we'll go set this on the press. So one thing about printmaking is planning ahead. That's something that you're not seeing in this demo because it takes a lot of time and work. But what I'm doing is I've already measured my block. I've already measured my paper. I already measured where everything's going to go. So there's a lot of measuring and thinking through this process before you ever do it. That way everything goes pretty seamless and it's already consistent. And so now I'm just going to use those markers I have on the paper to kind of line up the top. Hold my finger down here and stretch this paper, keep it tight, and then try to center it when I come down on the other end. And now I can run it through. Now, whenever you're using a press, be really careful. There's so much pressure that runs through this that you won't break your fingers, you'll shatter them. So make sure that you're not getting your hand caught in there or somebody else's. All right, coming back to the other side. Sandy might want to money shots right over here. Yeah, and then here you go. There you go. There's the print. And so often if we come over here, a lot of people ask about signing prints. So always sign your print in pencil, not pen. Pen is not archival like pencil is. I normally sign over here to the right, but you can do it anywhere along the bottom. Some people do it just under the image. Some people do it down here. I've been known to also sign the back because I don't like the aesthetics of it on the print sometimes in the front. But so if I sign here, I usually do the date 21 for the year. And then I'll do an addition here. This is just an artist proof. So I'll do AP and then a title here if I had a title. Okay. And so prints could be done with titles anywhere between 1 to 10 to 1 to 20, whatever the final number is. Okay, that's the final number. So 1 of 10, 2 of 10. So you do it like this: 2 of 10, 3 of 10, 4 of 10. Okay, so the number total is that 10, and this is what out of 10. Doesn't matter which one it is. Some people care if it's 1 of 10 or 10 of 10, but they're all supposed to be identical. Okay, and then AP means artist proof. So that's just the proof I did for me. Sometimes a printer gets one of the proofs if there's a printer who's printing for you, and that could be a PP, printer's proof. There could be a varied edition, meaning that every print out of the whole edition is slightly different than the other one. It could be a varied edition print, but yeah, and there's all kinds of other little ways that people sign them, but those are kind of like the most basic ones. Yeah, I already did artist proof. Usually an artist proof is the most valuable. So if you got an AP, that's pretty solid for collectors because it's the personal print of the artist. Or printer's proof is also very valuable because there's very few of those. That means that's the actual print that the printer themselves got out of the edition. And so those are more they're harder to find than the others. Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I think
Well,
I got through everything.
you did, and through your PowerPoint, you showed really wide range of skills, Jake. I never saw that work that you showed there. You gravitated towards printmaking. Why is it? Why do you gravitate towards printmaking? Is there some history there that moved you?
Yeah, so printmaking, to me, when I was an undergrad, I went to undergrad at Savannah College of Art and Design, and when I was in there and I was studying, but I was realizing, because they're really big on art history, right? And they're just in recalling history in general, that everything goes back to the print. Everything, you know, the books, the writing, all printed, and then the images that we see to recall history is all printed. So I started to you know, be critical about what I was reading, critical about how a lot of this stuff is brought across, especially from a non-Indigenous perspective. And so I thought, well, I need the vehicle that was used to disseminate this information and create these ideals was through the print. And so I thought, well, how do I have a discussion about these in the best way possible? So using the medium that was used. And so whether it's a wood block, you know, and I'm looking at images of wood blocks and that process at that time, they were really popular, then I'm going to go back to that time in that time capsule and use that same medium from that same time. And it's almost like I'm infiltrating not only the colonial narrative, but I'm infiltrating the time. I'm almost dropping these photographers until you really look at the details. They don't look like they're now. The way that I print them, they look like they're old. And I've had people look at them and go, are these Curtis's? Where are these? I've never seen these before. And then they look at a little detail and they see a street light or someone's wearing tennis shoes and they're like, wow, okay, no, wait a minute, this is new. And so in some way, I'm not just infiltrating the colonial narrative and the idea of documenting things in history and critiquing them, but I'm also kind of in some way going back into that time. And I'm infiltrating the time. I'm dropping seeds within the time frame of these timelines. And these timelines are with different print processes at different time in history. Just like the letterpress, photogravures, collotypes, woodcuts, lithography. I do some lithography work as well, etching. So all that stuff is really talking about in printmaking many, many layers of how we look at time, documentation, people, and critiquing them. And I feel like, you know, if I'm really going to talk about this, I'm not going to do a painting about it. I'm going to do a print about it because I want to talk about the essence of this, which is how we are documenting these things, how we're relating this. Nowadays, everything's documented through video and everything like that, you know, and through current technology. But I'm really referencing not how we're doing it now, but I'm talking about how it was done in the past, because that's how we're at where we're at right now. That's why we have these perceptions and ideas that it's from the past. So yeah, that's kind of why.
Well, talking about the past, then, are there any like native printmakers that inspired you, you know, prior to getting into it? Who inspired you?
Coming through, one of my first native mentors was Zig Jackson. He's a Mandan, Hadatsu, and Ripperai. He was teaching photography in Savannah. And so he was like one of the first native artists that I really started having these deep discussions with and talking about process, talking about history, talking about issues, giving me books. He would constantly give me books to read and things. He would show me different artists and what artists were doing. And so that was great. And Melanie Yazzie was the first native printmaker that really I started working with and was mentoring me. Marwin Begay, another one, really important friend. Marwin and printmaker, really amazing printmaker. And then there's just been many more that kind of picked up over the years because there's this like really great tight-knit community of native printmakers that we all are just like 1 degree of separation from each other or less than that. Yeah, so yeah, we all kind of stick to each other and help each other. And it seems like any native printmaker, if I called them, was trying to work out something, they would just go, yeah, let me help you. Yeah.
We got a great question here from an anonymous attendee. What's next for you? Another show? Will COVID influence the future of art for you? Boarding schools? What's some of the topics that you are looking at down the road?
That's a great question. I'm looking more closer to some of my tribal history. I think going up to Chico in 2019 and doing an exhibition, it made me actually kind of, I had to talk. That exhibition was really important because I was working with the university, but I was also working with my tribe. And there was like this, it was just like a tandem of 3 different groups going on. Me and the curator were working and trying to figure out this exhibition, but we were also relaying this information to the university and the tribe, because the tribe, I didn't want to do anything the tribe didn't see fit, right? Or see not fit. So with that, I spoke with a lot of different tribal members. I spent a lot of time with elders and different people like that. And also spending some time in the cemetery. And what I found was there were Hawaiians buried in our cemetery with our tribal members over the years, so our ancestors. And there's this long history of Hawaiians that were living in our village and married into our families and are part of our culture and who we are. And so I'm really interested in researching more about our connection with the Hawaiians in our village and that history, and speaking to that with my work in some way, and really thinking about how can I start to unravel these deeper parts of the history of our community and our people that people have no idea the relationship we had with the Hawaiians and how important that was, and how they are family. Like they literally, there's many families in our village that are also Hawaiian as well as Mechoopda, and that was a really important relationship for us. And I kind of want to bring that back, because I think we're, all of us indigenous people, we really have come back together in these really powerful ways. For me, since Standing Rock was this really powerful moment where everybody was supporting each other, because there wasn't just Hawaiians going to Standing Rock. There was Maoris from, Aotearoa, New Zealand, that were also coming in and supporting. So the support network and our relationships with our cousins who might not even be on Turtle Island, I think it's a really I think it's really important to revisit that and make that bond stronger, and that communication stronger with because they need our help as well, and we need to support them, and not just them supporting us. So yeah, revisiting that history and finding a way to have that conversation. Yeah.
Can you get prints at WarBird Press?
Would have to actually contact me through email, or contact WarBird Press, send me a message. I don't have a online store. So pretty much, yeah, either it would have to be you catch me somewhere or contact me personally to arrange that.
Well, we're nearing the end of the session, but I just want to put this one more question out there, unless we get another. But you're a professor at ASU, so you see a lot of students coming through there, and I just want to get your feelings, kind of the gauge on what you're seeing for the future of American Indian art.
That's a pretty heavy question. I don't know. Like, there's always this cool stuff that's happening. There's young artists that are coming through that are making interesting stuff, but there's also older artists who are changing their work, and they're having new concepts and new ideas. And what I'm really excited about is that it's becoming seen more, not just visual art, like making prints or paintings, but really important seeing some of the shows that are coming out now, seeing Reservation Dogs, and the fact that Sterling and Taika have basically hired all indigenous people, in front and behind the camera. I mean, even makeup and stunt and hair and stuff are natives, indigenous people working on this film, and it's so good. It's so damn good. These writers, these actors, these directors, and I'm seeing a lot of importance and emphasis on storytelling from our community through the medium of video. I think is really important, because I'm seeing more and more indigenous people that are going to the route of storytelling through video in more contemporary form, and I think that's going to even be even heavier as it comes on. I think this show is going to be pivotal and bringing Native voices to the table, because man, that's just such a great show, and the writers and everybody who's working on that, the actors, directors, and producers, they're just killing it. They're killing it, and it's just I think it's just going to get bigger. And the support, I think the real great thing to look at this is how everybody's supporting everybody. That I'm not seeing it such a divide between Native people and Indigenous people. I'm seeing actually more, we're going to support you and you're going to support us, and everybody's kind of coming together to support network. And I think it's just going to get stronger and stronger that way. And we as a people are going to get stronger and stronger that way. Yeah.
Right on, Jake. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge, showing us, walking us through the process. It's a rare opportunity. We actually get to see it go down like that. So.
If I was going through all this really quick, this is kind of like a time constraint, and it's like I have so much to show in so little time. So I just wanted to make sure I got through everything and showed as much as possible. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, just real quick before we go, I wanted to pop on here. Marcus, if you could share a little bit about the creative aging program that you've been doing, both with Jake and then what's coming up next in the future.
Sure. Well, we've been hosting a creative aging at the 55 plus. It's open to everyone who signs up. You sign up online, normally through our Native Arts Resource Group. We host the links there, but you can get the links by just contacting me, and you go and you sign up. The classes range. This has been a hybrid class. We've done some that have been completely online through the past 18 months. It's sponsored by the Roja Foundation. So it is a foundation sponsored workshop. The engagements are focused on not only the artwork, but socializing and creating bonds and communities through these art gatherings. So it's very interesting and very pleasant to be a part of it. And we don't have another schedule, but we do have some workshops scheduled. If you look online on the Native Arts Resource Group, what is that? narg.herd.org. So it's narg.herd, HEARD.org. You can see the various classes that are coming up.